Hi, and welcome to A Victorious Life and Outreach Teaching Ministry located here in the beautiful city of Roses, Tyler, Texas. I'm your host, Lori Stimson Ortega, and as always, we want to say thank you for allowing us to come into your homes and through modern technology by way of Suddenlink Media. We are in our 11th year of television ministry, and we will say every single time the cameraman says, "I'm rolling when you are," or "I'm already starting," I get excited because you know what? We teach a simple gospel. You know, the gospel of Jesus Christ. It was a simple gospel and still is a simple gospel, but it will yield and produce profound results when it is applied to your life. Now, we don't have a whole lot of announcements. We want to say we are still anticipating the fall Bible study to begin September 11th, which is on a Monday night, Mr. Cameraman. And we said 6 to 7 p.m. On Monday nights, and it's going to be a 6-week Bible study, and it's going to be on being better, how to live better, because we live in a society where people are satisfied living an average life, or can I say this, living an average no good life when they could live a better life. So that's what we're going to talk about. We're going to just have a 6-week study on what it means to be better. And you know what? We're only going to look at the red letters. How's that sound? We're only going to look at the red letters, and every person who owns a Bible, who has ever seen a Bible, knows that the red letters basically have been accredited as being the words of Jesus. So how to live better, we're going to take a look at the words of Jesus, the red letters. Maybe we should change the title to red letters, huh? Either or. That'll be interesting. So those are the only announcements that we have. The cameraman has not prompted me with any new announcements. If all else, I hate to say if all else fails, but more than likely the Bible study will be at 411 West Front, where we've had it before, but we're still checking out some different locations. So be watching next Sunday. Go online and check out the website and Facebook, and you'll see different things like that. In the event it changes, or for the final one. Now, I know, Mr. Cameraman, people are given the last 2 weeks as a United States, as a bona fide United States of America, a citizen of this country that we live in. I know people are wanting, we'll say the religious community, the religious crowd, to kind of comment on what's going on in the world, and I do believe there is a place for us to reference, things, current events that are taking place in society. But I'll admit, Mr. Cameraman, that's not what the lesson is going to be about on today. The lesson is going to be about transforming by conforming, because I think a lot of the things that are taking place, when you really look at it, I don't believe that people are as people are angry. Bottom line, people are angry, and that anger let's just back up. It starts with resentment. So when resentment and frustration, we've taught this before, when frustration is not put in check, it evolves into anger. And when anger is not put in check and addressed, it evolves into bitterness. And what we're seeing is society is angry. We see those different stages of frustration and anger and bitterness, and we see that because sometimes, when our lives do not turn out the way that we anticipated them to turn out, we got to blame somebody or something. If we don't have that top of the line car sitting in a garage that's attached to to an immaculate, astounding, larger than life home behind a gated community, we've got to look at ourselves, and if we feel like we have failed in any aspect or any area of our personal life, if we have not accomplished our hopes, our dreams, our ambitions, if we have not fully utilized our gifts, our talents, and our abilities, then before we look at ourselves, we have a tendency as humans to point the finger at other people. And what's happening in our society, like I said, people are angry, they're frustrated, and they're bitter because life has not turned out the way they had anticipated for it to turn out. But I say to those of us who understand what's taking place, this it's not going to get any better. Okay, it's not going to get any better until the root of the problem is addressed. And that's really why we are here on today, to not take on the problems of the world, but to usher in a solution to the problems of the world. If there was a quote, and the cameraman may know who said this, it's not unique to anyone that I know or who coined the phrase. It said, before a man can move mountains, he first has to move himself. So we've got to understand that in order for society is not going to get any better. Society's not going to get any better, but we as individuals, we can still get better and make a difference in somebody's life. So we're gonna talk about that, and I'm really leaning. I told the cameraman it was going to be Romans 12:2, but I'm really leaning towards Matthew chapter. Let's see if we can merge them. Matthew chapter 24. I keep hearing that. Is that all right, Mr. Cameraman? Mm-hmm. After what are we in now? 15, 16, about 3 years of taping. Yeah, almost. Or 3 or 4 years of taping. You pretty much know this is like a roller coaster ride. Mm-hmm. Let's say John. Then I hop on there, in the book of Acts. All right. Let's go to Matthew chapter 24. That's really where I feel led to go. And Jesus went out and departed from the temple, and his disciples came to him for to show him the buildings of the temple. Verse 2, and Jesus said unto them, see ye not all these things? Verily I say unto you, there shall not be left here one stone upon another that shall not be thrown down. Now let's take a look at let's make some sense of society. Okay, let's make some sense of what's taking place, not just in society, but in the minds and in the hearts of man. Now, in Matthew chapter 24, we see where Jesus, when you look at Matthew chapter 23, Jesus has basically, he's instructed, he's taught, he's given examples, negative examples of life, and those we're going to talk about Matthew chapter 23 in the upcoming fall Bible study. But so he's talked to them and taught not just the disciples, but he's also taught the multitude about different things, about living and examples of what you should do, what you should not do. So after he finishes teaching them, they are leaving the temple, okay, or we'll say they're passing by the temple. And in verse number 1, the disciples begin to show Jesus the different buildings, maybe the different architecture, maybe the layout and the setup, because remember, Jesus did not live in Jerusalem. So they were showing him some things that they thought was of interest. It's kind of like when I ask somebody, if somebody tells me, hey, we're going to Dallas, what's my first inclination, being from that area and having lived there many years, my first inclination is, hey, what part of Dallas? Or when somebody says, hey, where are you from? They say Dallas. You say, well, what part? If they say, I'm from Mesquite. If you're from Dallas, that's not Dallas. That's Mesquite. So usually when people from Tyler, they say, oh, we're just going up to go shopping. First thing I say is, hey, you know what? Why don't you check out the Galleria? If they're from another state, I'm like, if you want to get an idea of Texans and clothing and all of those things, go to the Galleria. So we're pointing out different restaurants or what have you. So that's similar to what the disciples were doing. So they're showing him the physical side of it. And look what Jesus said. Let's read verse 2 again. He says, see ye not all these things? Verily I say unto you, there shall not be left here one stone upon another that shall not be thrown down. He was saying to them, okay, you know what? While they were fascinated with the physical side of showing him the temple, they were fascinated with the architecture, fascinated with the things that they could see and they could touch. But Jesus realized, again, because remember, he knew all things, but he realized there was still that part of them that was caught up in the physical side of things. He understood that they had become enamored and just so excited about something of a physical nature. So as not to rebuke them, he says to them, okay, you know what? You see all of this. You see the temple. You see the buildings. You see the beauty of it. He's saying that there's going to come a time when there's not going to be one stone left on top of the other, where this is all going to go away. And we know that with time, all things cease to be. You know, some of the greatest architectural structures that are in our world today, they have to be maintained. You know, the Sistine Chapel and that statue of, we'll say, statue of David, the Mona Lisa, all of the pyramids, you know, believe it or not, they do have maintenance on the pyramids, because with time, all things deteriorate. And if they're deteriorating, that means at some point they're going to cease to be. So he was saying to them, don't get caught up in the physical things. Don't get caught up with just the things that you can see, the things that deal with the five senses, the things you can see, taste, touch, hear, and smell. He's like, don't get caught up in that. And what's interesting about this temple that they were pointing out, it was not the temple that Solomon had built. It was a temple that basically Herod had built as a monument to himself, because a lot of those Roman leaders, in order for them to be remembered throughout history, they would build a Colosseum or some type of religious worship, religious house of worship or place of worship. They would build bridges. They would build elaborate buildings, not as a reflection of, their religious connection to God, but it was more of a monument to them. So he was saying, don't get caught up in the physical side. And that's what he says to us. He wants us to understand, don't get caught up behind the things that you see. Yes, some things we see, it should rally us. It should it should make us more aware of the things that are taking place around us, but we should not get so caught up in, I've got to do this, I got to do that, I got to live here, got to make this, got to have that, till we lose sight of the true meaning and the true essence of life. So he was saying to them, again, don't get caught up with the physical place of worship. Don't get caught up with, we have this, we have that, where we physically go to worship God. Because he was saying those things are really of irrelevance. This is going to sound kind of mean, Mr. Cameraman, but it proves my point in my mind. People get caught up in physical religious structures, and they're like, oh, this is a holy place, when the craftsmen or the workers could have been atheists or agnostic. They were just working. And he was saying, he's saying that to them, don't get caught up in the physical side of things. And then we get to verse number 3. It says, and as he sat upon the Mount of Olives, the disciples came unto him privately, saying, tell us, when shall these things be? And what shall be the sign of thy coming and of the end of the world? So as he's sitting there and he's teaching, they don't ask him the question, their questions. They don't ask him or approach him openly, but they waited until he was in a more private, more intimate setting. And they asked him two very unique questions. And I want us to focus on those questions because they're unique to us as individuals. The first question they asked, they said, "Tell us, when shall these things be?" Now, that sounds like a fair question, okay? It sounds like there's nothing wrong with asking and wanting to know. And that's something I've always said, we've always taught here. There's nothing wrong with being curious. There's nothing wrong with, if you have questions, taking those questions to God and asking Him for guidance, for instructions. There's also times where you go and you say, "Hey, I don't understand this. Why is this happening?" Not only what am I doing? If you've told me to do this, why is this happening? So there was nothing wrong with them being curious and asking the questions. But the first question that they asked, incidentally, was unique to just them as individuals. They said, "Tell us, when shall these things be?" Now, this was not, believe it or not, this was not a spiritual question. They were not asking Jesus because they were concerned about saving the lost and reaching the poor and feeding the hungry. They were not concerned with that. They were concerned about them and theirs. They wanted to know, when is this going to happen? And the first reason they wanted to know when that was going to happen or take place was because they were basically a people without a country. They were under Roman control, Roman domination, so they were limited as to what they could do within their own land. They still lived on the land and in different areas, but they were subject to the rules and the regulations instilled by the Romans. So when they asked this first question, it was not a spiritual question. It was a question, going back to the physical side of it, them showing the physical buildings and temples and stuff. It was a physical question. They wanted to know, when is this going to stop for us? When are we going to regain our power? When are the Romans going to leave our area? When will we be back in control again? So that's what they were asking. Tell us, when shall these things be? So they were asking a question that dealt with something of a physical nature. It was non-spiritual. And if we're not careful, we'll do that same thing. We'll want to know how is what's taking place, how is it, when and where is it going to end, because I don't want it to affect my family, or I don't want it to affect my job or my lifestyle. I don't want it to affect, my financial situation or my physical situation. If we're not careful, when we are praying and when we are meditating on the Lord, all of our questions to Him will be of a physical nature that deals with something that is uncomfortable to us as individuals. So that's the first question. That first question, it was not religious. It had nothing to do with a spiritual, it was not a spiritually motivated question. They didn't want to know anything spiritually. Going back, again, merging those two verses together, verse number 1, they were showing the physical side. So He reined them back in to get them to focus on spiritual things. But then when they talked to Him privately, the first question they asked went back to something that is physical. So then they ask Him, "And what shall be the sign of thy coming and of the end of the world?" So after they ask Him the physical question in reference to, when are we going to get our stuff back? When are we going to be in control? When are we going to be able to be in charge? Then they turned around and they said, "And tell us some things, give us some signs. How do we know when you're coming back? When you leave and you go away, how do we know when you're coming back?" That's another physical indication that they had not yet, it had not yet fully been revealed to them, spiritually revealed to them, who Jesus was. Okay? Because they were thinking, well, He's going to go away, but He said He's coming back. So they were thinking He's going to go on a journey, maybe 2 days, 3 days, a month, a year, etc. They were clueless as to as to what he was really trying to say to them. Now, we're going to pause and we're going to hop over to Romans 12, 1 and 2 to show you how when Christ comes into our lives, when we understand who he really is, when who he is has been revealed to us, it changes our mentality. Romans 12 and 2 says, and be not conformed to this world, but be ye transformed by the renewing of your mind, that ye may prove what is that good and acceptable and perfect will of God. So they had not had that Romans 12 and 2 experience. Their minds had not been spiritually transformed. They had been brought in physically. Okay, they had been selected and they were in training, or he was teaching them. But when you look at the questions that they were asking him, they were spiritually void of the big picture. So when they're asking him, what are some things, what should we look for? Again, it was not anything spiritual that they wanted to know initially. They wanted to know about themselves and their property and being in control. And then they wanted to know, hey, when are you coming back? So you see how those questions deal with just one area of the life of man. It dealt with just that physical side. But when we read Romans 12 and 2, be not conformed to this world, but be ye transformed by the renewing of your mind. And then that other part of it, then you understand that Jesus wanted them to go a little higher. He wanted them to go a little higher. He wanted them to go deeper so that they would understand this stuff. There's stuff that's going to be taking place until you either die or you are raptured. He was basically saying there are some things that will be beyond your physical control. There will be some things physically that will give you an indication of the spiritual times that you're living in. And that's really where we are today. We see a lot of physical things that are taking place to rally us spiritually and take us to Romans 12 and 2. Be not conformed to this world, meaning don't try to fit in. Don't try to put a round peg in a square hole. Don't try to do that. He's saying, don't be conformed. Don't align yourself with this world, but be transformed. Transform means to be changed by the renewing. Renewing means to be refreshed. Be not conformed. Don't fit in. Don't try to fit in with this world. Be not conformed to this world, but be ye transformed. Be changed by the renewing of your mind. Be refreshed. Let your mind be cleared. Let your mind be restored, renewed by your mind. So that's what he was saying to them. Even though Romans 12 and 2 had not been written, he was saying that to them in his own little way. He was saying, again, be ye transformed by the renewing of your mind. And that's where we are. He wanted them to understand there are some physical things that are going to take place, and those physical things that take place are going to let you know spiritually exactly where we are. Exactly where we are. And then he begins to talk to them. We're going to go, Mr. Cameraman, down to verse number 5. We're going to go to Matthew chapter 5, and then we're going to go back to Romans 12, 1 and 2, if that's okay. Verse number 4 says, and Jesus answered and said unto them, take heed that no man deceive you. Now that's powerful. It's powerful because, brothers and sisters, that's exactly where we are. Viewing audience, we are so there. Jesus warned them. He says, take heed that no man deceive you. He was saying, I want you to be aware. Okay, there's a phrase that's floating around now that's saying stay woke, right? It's saying stay woke, meaning when you hear that phrase, it's giving you the benefit that, okay, yeah, we're going to write off that you've been, you had your eyes closed and you weren't aware and you've been sleeping for a while, but now you woke up. What does that mean? That means that now that you're awake, you're more aware. You're more consciously aware of things that are taking place around you, and you're more aware of things that are happening, that they've been happening all along, but because you were in a state where you really weren't paying attention to it. Can't we say that? You really weren't paying attention to it, that to a certain extent it became your norm. Because you weren't paying attention, it became your norm. But now you're more aware. And that's what Jesus was saying to them. He's saying, become more aware. Take heed, take heed that no man deceives you. Now, that's really what we're seeing that's taking place just in society all over, in the religious community, political, cultural, socioeconomic, all different levels. But we're only going to speak to the spiritual side of things for the show. But he said, that's the first thing he said, take heed that no man deceives you. And he was saying to them, okay, you know what? Before I give you the signs, before I give you the signals or the clues or the cues that I'm coming back, the first thing he speaks to is that element that deals with our mentality, that element, that part of us that deals with our ability to rationalize and reason. And he's saying, take heed that nobody deceives you. In order to be deceived, that means there has to have been an element of trust. It had to have been given. So he was saying to them, make sure that nobody deceives you and takes advantage of you. Look at what happens. Verse 5, for many shall come in my name, saying, I am Christ, and shall deceive many. And he was saying to them, make sure that you remain in a spiritual condition, a spiritual state where you will not be deceived by what you hear and what you see. He's giving us a heads up. He said, because there are going to be a lot of people that are running around here saying that they're coming in the name of the Lord, and they're not coming in my name. They're coming in their needs, their wants, their hopes, their dreams, and their own personal ambitions. He was saying many are going to come. They're going to come in my name, and they're going to say that I am Christ. Now, you know what? There's a red flag in our society whenever we hear somebody say, I'm Jesus Christ. We automatically know, okay, loony bird, fell off the train, okay, unmedicated. We automatically assume that there's something wrong with that individual because, we just don't believe that they are who they are. Because, as Christians, we like to say we are aware that you can't have three Jesus Christs, if that's the correct word to say. I was watching, there was a video that had one man, he's down in, I think, Bolivia or somewhere, saying he's Jesus Christ. There was another man that was over in the Ukraine saying he's Jesus Christ. And there was another man down in Australia saying that he's Jesus Christ. And there's one floating around, one floating around in Pasadena, California, saying that he's Jesus Christ. And my question was, did it not occur to whoever was doing the documentary to ask the other man, well, what about those other three that are saying that they're Jesus Christ? So we automatically rule out the people that are saying, hey, my name, who are you? I'm Jesus Christ. I'm the Son of God. We spiritually automatically rule those individuals out. But Jesus was saying, be aware of those individuals as well, but also be aware of the individuals that look good, that sound good, that say all of the right things, but there's no evidence of a lifestyle change. There's no evidence of his working in them and through them. And I said this, I believe, on a week prior. I gave the example of was that the week prior, Mr. Cameron, the man with the church Bentley? Mm-hmm. That's lunacy. Okay, that's spiritual lunacy. But it's also a reference to verse number 4. Take heed that no man deceives you. Sometimes when we're in religious environments, sometimes people can say some stuff. The Spirit of the Lord told me everybody needs to give $100 and you're going to be blessed. Okay, well, you know what? This is just me. I've been blessed for a long time. I was blessed from day one. Okay. As I entered into this world, exiting my mother's womb, Mr. Cameron, I was already blessed. I was healthy. I had life. I say insurance. I had life. I had my health. I had the activities and the uses of all of my limbs. So we are already blessed. You never have to there is no amount of money that you can drop in an offering pan or an offering plate. There's no amount of money you can smack in anybody's palm that is going to increase your blessings. You are already blessed. So when people are soliciting monies to pay for cars, houses, land, clothing, jewelry, and they're coming in the name of the Lord. Remember what Jesus said to the disciples: take heed that no man deceive you. And if we're not careful, we'll automatically assume that everything that's taking place in the religious community, everything that's taking place in the houses of worship is of God. And you know what? And if I have to be that lone voice crying out in the wilderness to say, that's why we are losing people. That is why people are not coming to the house of the Lord the way that they used to, because we've got a lot of charlatans and flim-flam and okey-doke people that are trying to coerce people not only out of their monies, but their time and their energy. And people are walking away because at the end of the day, they have nothing to show for it. They don't have spiritual peace. They don't have spiritual peace. They don't have spiritual understanding. They don't have joy. They don't have peace. They don't have happiness. They don't have anything. And that's the time that we're living in, that Jesus gave us a heads up. He said, hey, make sure that nobody deceives you, that many are going to come in my name, and they're going to deceive, they're going to trick a whole lot of people. Now, we're not speaking against organized religion. We're not speaking against church attendance or anything like that. But what we're saying is, if at the end of the day, if you go into the house of the Lord, or a place of worship, and you leave exactly the same way you came, but your $20, can I say that, Mr. Cameron? Your $20, your wallet is $20 lighter, or $100 lighter, and you don't have peace, you don't have joy, you don't have love, you don't have happiness. And if there was nothing said there that convicted you spiritually to know, hey, I can do better. If there was nothing said that spiritually convicted you to and challenged you to, hey, accept Christ, change your life, then at the end of the day, what did you get out of it? And that's what we're saying, that Jesus was saying, make sure nobody deceives you. Make sure, and we understand churches, they have to be run like businesses. You got to pay lights, gas, water. You got to pay all of those things. So nobody's saying don't just go to church and not give monies. But what we're saying is don't be deceived into thinking that you can buy your way into heaven. Don't be deceived into thinking that you can purchase more spirituality. Don't be deceived into thinking that if I give this individual $1,000, that God is going to turn around and give me 100 million. That's not how that works. The only way I know that works, Mr. Cameron, is in boxing. Okay, that's the only way. If you just show up, you go in the ring. Soon as they tap the bell, you're guaranteed $30 million or $100 million. That's the only place I know it works like that. Okay, only place in boxing. It does not work like that when it comes to the spiritual side of things, because Jesus was saying to them, notice how he diverted their attention away from physical things. And that's what we're saying on today. We're saying that you've got to be transformed. The way he conforms us is by transforming. As we are transforming, he's conforming us to who he is. And we've got to understand that the gospel is not just to satisfy sinners. That's not just what the gospel is. If the gospel were a piece of the pie, it's 90% to go out and to reach the person that is lost, to compel them to come back and be restored back to God the Father through his son Jesus Christ. But then there's that percentage in there that speaks to the spiritual side of this life that we have accepted. It's that part that is it's preached so that God so that the Lord may be satisfied, and it's preached so that everything that is said and everything that we do and how we live our lives is meant to be satisfactory to the Lord, not to each other, but to the Lord. So in all things, we've got to make sure that we're doing the work that the Lord has ordained and commissioned for us to do by way of his gospel. We've got to make sure that as believers, as modern day disciples, as modern day believers in Christ, that we are living a life that is pure, that is clean, that is acceptable to God. Not just acceptable to each other. You know, we live in a society where people are being falsely led to believe that if I just physically go to church, I paid my dues. You know, I had a conversation with a lady about this on yesterday. She said when she was growing up, she would hear people say, well, I went to church, and they come back and they say, but I'm going to the club later tonight on Sunday. If there was like a little rat hole place open, people would go to church on Sunday, and then they say after church they're doing whatever they wanted to do, and they would say, well, I paid my dues to the Lord, so I did what I needed to do. And they were falsely being led to believe that that's all it entails, just showing up physically at a place, and like God is somewhere saying, okay, the angel is have the tablet, okay, I see Lori went to church today, check, and then that's it. So they're just checking for church attendance. But I say to us in 2017, there's deeper depths that we need to go to. There's higher heights. We need to, I put this on a Facebook post, we need to launch out. The Lord wants us to launch out into the deep. He wants us to go deeper. He wants us to understand. Don't be rattled by the things that you are seeing. Don't be so worried until you're afraid to leave your house. You're afraid to talk to anybody. Don't allow the enemy to deceive you into thinking that you're on the losing side. This is our finest hour. This is the time for those of us who say that we have found truth. This is the time for us to share the truth of who Jesus really is. This is the time for us to say, hey, you know what? You can live in this world and you can still function and operate and move in this world. You can still be successful, but in this world you can make your life count for something, and you can live for something bigger and greater than anything you could ever imagine. So when you think about those things, you think about the gospel, and that's what Jesus was trying to get them to understand, those disciples early on. He was trying to get them to understand, like I'm trying to help us understand on today, that the life-changing gospel of Jesus Christ will have you do three things. It will convert you. It will change you. Going back to Romans 12:2. Be not conformed to this world, but be ye transformed by the renewing of your mind. So the gospel, it will change you. It will convert you. Okay, that's the first thing it will do. And the next thing that it will do is it will draw you closer so that you can start to learn how to live this life. Because as he's transforming you, he's conforming you to who he is. And when we say that we have Christ on the inside, what we're really saying is that we have accepted him. And because he's living in us, he's going to live through us. And so the things that you used to do, you're not going to want to do anymore. Those old mentalities, those non-progressive mentalities, if he's in you, he's going to change and start transforming your mind. And he's transforming you by conforming you to who he is. And that's what we need to understand in 2017. The Spirit of God is going to remain true to who and what he is. If he's not about hustling, lying, cheating, stealing, any of those things, deception, if he's on the inside of you, then he's going to remain true to who he is. So if he's on the inside of you, yeah, you may have been deceptive before, but you're not going to be deceptive anymore if he's on the inside of you. You're not going to be a con artist, a con man, or a con woman. You're not going to be those things anymore. You're not going to be a liar. You're not going to be a thief. You're not going to be any of those things that he is not, because when he's on the inside of you, he's not going to deviate from who he is. So we've got to understand, when you are converted, he's transforming you by conforming you to who he is, and he's drawing you closer and making you more of like who he is, and preparing you for what he has for you to do. And the second thing that's important, that's why Bible knowledge and Bible reading is very important. So that, like Jesus said in Matthew chapter 24, verse 4, take heed that no man deceive you. Verse 5, for many will come in my name and they shall deceive. Many are going to come in my name saying they're the Christ, and they're going to deceive many. That's why you've got to read it and study it for yourself. And let's take a look at those two verses, Romans 12, 1 and 2, more in depth. How's my time, Mr. Cameraman? Okay. Romans 12, 1 and 2 says, I beseech you therefore, brethren, by the mercies of God, that ye present your bodies a living sacrifice, wholly acceptable unto God, which is your reasonable service. Verse 2, and be not conformed, there it is, to this world, but be ye transformed by the renewing of your mind, that ye may prove what is that good and acceptable and perfect will of God. And let's look at these two verses closely. Paul is beginning, he begins by saying, you know what, I want to do something. And before he tells you what he wants to do, he gently reminds you of the mercies of God. He's reminding them that God's mercy reaches far beyond anything that anyone can ever fully comprehend. We will never understand the mercy of God. We will never understand why God decided to go in the direction that he decided to go in. And he wants them to think about, Paul wants them to think about what God has done for man. And he wants us to think about, we'll just say us, he wants us to think about how God has met our need to get right with him, to be in right fellowship with him. That's why it's important for us to understand you can have all of these things and still not be happy. You can have all of the tangible, every time they come out with a new car, you can get the new car. Every time they come out with a new handbag, designer bag, or a new style, or a new pair of sneakers, or every time they build a new community, high dollar community, you can find yourself with that zip code, living in that zip code. But you know what? If you are out of order or out of fellowship with God, you're not going to be happy. Those things are not going to work for you. So he wants us to understand, Paul is saying he wants us to understand that something had to take place in order for our lives to be full, in order for our lives to be complete. Something had to be done in order for us to really be able to live and appreciate life. Now, what's interesting is when you understand what Paul is saying, the subliminal messages that he's saying leading up to Romans chapter 12, then you start to get that feeling that, wait a minute, when Jesus said, it is finished on the cross at Calvary, you understand that he ushered in the power for us to live life. He ushered in the power for us to really be not conformed to this world, but to be transformed. And when you think about it from that standpoint of the cross, when he said it is finished, that meant anything that was holding you back from living the life that he ordained and intended for you to live, it was over. It was finished. Nothing from that moment on could prevent you from being in right fellowship with God. What does that mean? That means from that moment on, the life that God intended for man to live, you now had access to it through Jesus Christ. So when you get to Romans chapter 12, verse number 1, he says, therefore, because, and that's what he's saying. He's saying because of all that he has done, he says, this is what Paul is saying to the modern day believers and to those, we're saying this to modern day believers now, but this is what he was writing to those churches. He wanted us to understand that from that point on, because God has done something, because we have been set free, because we have been delivered, from that moment on, I want you to present or give every part of yourself to God. And the first thing he tells us is to present is our bodies, meaning this physical side of us. Now do you see how in Matthew chapter 24 verse 2, when Jesus was saying to them about, hey, this temple is going to, this not one stone is going to be left on each other, and he was talking about a physical nature, like we said earlier part of the broadcast. Look at what Paul is saying. Paul had to have received a deeper revelation of who Jesus really was and the purpose of salvation than any of those other individuals around him. So the first thing that he does is he tells us, present your bodies a living a sacrifice, holy, acceptable unto God. He tells us to present ourselves, present every part of who we are physically. And you know why he said that? He said present your bodies as a living sacrifice, because he knew that the power of the mind, the spirit, had to control the mind. It had to put that mind, those emotions, that will, it had to put it under subjection. So when he says present your bodies as a living sacrifice, holy and acceptable unto God, he was saying the only way you're going to do that, going into 12 and 2, is if you are transformed. Be ye transformed by the renewing of your mind. So he was saying the only way that you could put that, your will and the mental side of things, your thinking, the only way you could put that under subjection is if you had been spiritually transformed and your mind had been renewed. So the spirit covers your mind. And that's something, again, going back to Matthew chapter 24, the physical side, we cannot continue to just focus on things of a physical nature. We cannot just focus on, like Jesus was pointing out to those disciples, stop focusing on just things of a physical nature. Stop focusing on the things that you don't have. Stop focusing on the things that you do have. Don't stop focusing on the things that give the outward appearance of transformation, but spiritually you're still the same. So Paul was saying, present your body, present every part of you, present that to God. And I want to say this, that although God created and formed the human body to be a well-oiled, self-sustaining machine, the human body is really one of those things, again, that is more abused more than anything else. The physical side of it. So Paul was saying, okay, you know what? In the presentation of your body, present all of it. Not just your body, but present your mind. Present every part of you. And that's where we are in this society. We've got to present all of who we are. God, there's a song that said God wants it all. He wants it. He wants it all. He wants every part of us. He wants that part of us. He wants to work on our character traits. He wants to work on our motives. He wants to work on our ambitions, our gifts, our talent. He wants every part of us. And if we're not careful, we'll just do what the disciples were talking about, again, in reference to Matthew chapter 24. We'll just do that one thing where, okay, you know what? I'm here. I showed up. I'm in the choir. I'm an usher. I'm a deacon. Yes, I'm a bench member. I showed up. God should be pleased. God should be more than happy. I could have been anywhere else, but today I decided, you know what, let me go to church. I'm going to go to church. Okay, that's level one. Level two comes in when you're there, but you're really not there. Okay, you're really not there. Well, I'm just coming because my mother made me, or I'm just coming because I told somebody I was going to come visit, or I was raised this way, so I'm just there because it's a habit. But be ye transformed by the renewing of your mind. And that's what Paul is saying, that Jesus said in Matthew 24 in dealing with the physical side of things. Don't just get so physically caught up in going to the place of worship and you're not worshiping, or you're not engaging in true worship away from the building. You know, don't just get caught up in the fish and loaves. God did this for me. God gave me this. He opened this door. He closed this door. He handed me this. He laid this in my lap. Don't just get caught up with that, the physical side. And that's what Jesus was saying to them. And that's what Paul was saying over here about the presentation of who we are, every part of us. And you know, as he began to talk about that, he said, a living sacrifice, you know, a living sacrifice. And, you know, I know, Mr. Cameraman, some people may change the channel when I say this, but, you know, there are a lot of good people in the world. Okay, a whole lot of good people. I'm inclined to believe there are more good people than there are bad people. Okay? Now, you notice how I said that. There are more good people than there are bad people. Here's a problem with the statement like that. That means I could say I have faulty comparison? Okay, you see what I'm saying? Because my comparison could be they're good based on how they treat me. Okay? So just because people treat me nice and treat me good or treat me well, does not necessarily, that's not the guidelines for them being good people, right? And that's good rationale, don't you? So when I make a statement, there are good people, there are more good people in the world than there are bad people, the $100,000 question becomes, what is the definition of good? And I'm saying from a spiritual standpoint, if your definition of good only deals with physical things that they are giving you or doing for you or helping you out with, if those are the only things that they're doing, then that's a faulty statement. And that's what Jesus was trying to help the disciples understand, and what Paul was trying to help the church understand, that wait a minute, you know, you've got to live this. You've got to be, in order to be good, you've got to be spiritually transformed. Your mind has to be renewed in order for you to continue to do good and to live good and to be good. All of those things. He was saying you've got to continue. There's a place that there's something that you have to have in order for you to do that. Now, have we always made all of the right decisions? You know, I can only speak for myself. I've made some poor decisions, you know, because of faulty information, not enough information, misrepresentation of information. So I've made some poor decisions and some poor choices, you know, in my life. I'm sure have everyone else. But when you accept Christ, that's what we want to help you to understand. When you accept Christ, you are accepting a lifestyle change. With that lifestyle change comes a mentality change, an emotional change, a physical change. And those changes happen because you have been spiritually changed. You have been spiritually transformed. So it becomes the goal and the will and the mission of the Spirit to conform you to who He is, for you to become more and more like who He is. So that when a person, I'm sure the cameraman has come in contact with individuals like this, you know, when a person, before they accept Christ in their life, if they're so negative and they're pessimistic and they're complaining, after a while, you get kind of tired of hanging around with people like that. You know, when you see them coming, first thing you say is, "Oh Lord," you know, here they come. Because that has become their pessimism, their negativity, their whining, their complaining. That has become a part of who they are. So we'll just say we meet people like that. We introduce them to Christ. They accept Christ as their Lord and their Savior. They start coming to church. They start reading and, you know, do the life groups and all those things. What that person has to be aware of, what the Spirit makes them aware of, is when they start to think negatively, or when pessimism, when that spirit of pessimism starts to rest on them, if He's on the inside, He's going to conform them by transforming them. Okay? So the first thing that He's going to do is He's going to walk them through why they should not look at everything so negatively and shouldn't be pessimistic and shouldn't be complaining. The Spirit is going to help them to see that, wait a minute, things could be worse. The Spirit is going to help them see, wait a minute, you know what? That's not who I am. I don't want to be that way. So that's what we're saying. When Paul was writing, be not conformed to this world, but be ye transformed by the renewing of your mind, he was saying that to them to help us understand, wait a minute, don't focus just on the physical things. And that's what I'm saying. We've got to launch out into the deep. Stop focusing on the things that you can see, taste, touch, hear, and smell. Stop focusing on those physical things. We're bigger than that. We're better than that. We're more than that. Stop focusing on those physical things from the standpoint of your spiritual life. Okay, well, you know what? So what if a person is driving a high dollar car and you're listening to, oh, the Lord is doing this, the Lord is doing some wonderful things, the Lord is doing amazing things. Okay, that's fine. I'm saying do not allow what you see physically to determine where you are spiritually and where you remain spiritually. Stay focused. God will bless you. God will continue to bless you. God will meet and exceed and provide for your needs. And He said if your ways are pleasing, He would give you the desires of your heart. So instead of praying to be like the other person who you don't really know what the background is behind some of those physical testimonies, you don't know if they're struggling to pay for it, you don't know if somebody else signed for it, you don't know any of the background for that information. We're saying launch out into the deep. Stop focusing on physical things and focus on spiritual things. Focus on that side of you that says, you know what? I rejoice with that individual. Lord, I thank you. You have met and supplied my needs. Lord, I thank you. I have transportation. I have my life. I have my health. I have my strength. Lord, use me. Aspire to do and do greater things and go to higher levels and deeper depths spiritually. And what did Jesus say in Matthew? I believe it was Matthew chapter 6, verse 33, where He says, but seek ye first the kingdom of heaven, and all of these things shall be added. Yeah, but Matthew chapter 6, verse 33, but seek ye first the kingdom of God and His righteousness, and all these things shall be added unto you. Meaning, stop seeking physical things. Seek that deeper revelation of Him, that deeper knowledge of Him, that deeper calling. And He's calling on today. He's calling us to go out into deep and deeper waters so that we can make a difference in this chaotic world that we're living in, that we'll be able to speak life and to speak peace and to speak hope into the situation that we see taking place, not just in around America, but around the country. So we want to say uh, be encouraged on today. And you know what? He's holding up the 1 time, so that means I have like 1 minute. And in my last minute, I want to can I say send a shout out to Kendra Bircher, who is the founder and organizer of Prayer in the Park. A few weeks ago, I saw a video of some South Koreans praying, and I contacted Kendra and said, hey, you know what? Let's do this. Let's go to the high schools, John Tyler High School. Let's go pray at John Tyler. Let's go pray at Robert E. Lee. And we were able to meet, and some people met us out there. And this past Saturday, we were standing out there, and we were praying. It wasn't any loud yelling, screaming. And you know what? That next day, which was earlier this morning, Sunday morning, I saw another group of individuals on the campus. They were a group of men that were on the campus, and as I'm passing by, they were praying. So, and even at Lee, they were praying as well. So we want to say thank you for that opportunity. And as we always say, he's doing that. If you have Christ, you're already a winner. If you have the Spirit of the living God, you can face any challenge life throws your way. You can live a victorious life. God bless you.